one of the most topical conversations across the world in recent times has been the issue of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and now what the policy direction has become under President Donald Trump. Many people across the world, of course, including Nigeria, have expressed concerns to say that, look, USAID has been supporting critical causes around the globe for many, many years. And this disruption, as some experts now call it, is going to change the narrative. It's remarkably radical. Of course, that impact is going to also reverberate back at home in Nigeria. There are projects that USAID is funding across this country today, from healthcare to, well, even things around hygiene and things around education and what have you. I mean, issues that are critical to people's everyday life. So how do you close that gap by the time, with these pullouts of USAID? In Nigeria, for example, we hear that this kind of funding runs into several billions, and that is replicated across all countries on the continent of Africa and everywhere else in the world. Now, this again hits at the very core of the conversation around reliance, or if you like, dependence on foreign aid. Some have argued, development economists in particular, that it's time Nigeria looks inward and be more domestic, so to say, in its thinking, so that it can find homegrown indigenous solutions to its problems. Now, will this disruption become a blessing in disguise for this otherwise blessed country, or will it further bring to the spotlights the gaps that we have in very pivotal sectors of our national life? Now, to have this conversation, I'm joined this morning by an international development economist, KWAJI and NGIDA, to help us find insights and perspectives. First time on the show, is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So let's begin with all of these issues around reliance on foreign aid, for example. Okay. People have argued that, look, you will be living in denial as a country if you say, well, we won't rely on foreign aid. What exactly is too much when it comes to reliance or dependence on foreign aid?
Thank you once more for having me. So I would say, in terms of the reliance, Africa has to be very strategic when it comes to reliance on foreign aid, because whether we like it or not, foreign aid are meant to be an addendum to economic development. They are not supposed to be the mainstay of a nation's economy. And one question that we should ask to kind of give a context to this discussion is, why are we experiencing some of these disruptions, in terms of foreign aid? I think it's because of the evolution of multilateralism. So now multilateralism is moving from multi to many. So advanced countries are more specific around qualitative partnership and not just quantitative partnership. So it's high time for Africa as a continent to think global and act domestic.
Think global, act domestic.
So it is not sustainable to depend on foreign aid, because foreign aid is not really would I say, entirety business of the international community to help us when it comes to our national development. It's supposed to be like a complementary effort and not the main effort. So to answer your question, countries need to be very strategic. Countries need to frame their economic development model to accommodate foreign aid and not to make it like the major stay of their economy. So that when these disruptions happen, it's not going to have like a significant impact on the economy, the domestic economy.
Okay, this is probably trite, but we've heard people say that giving of foreign aid is some sort of neo-colonialism. We're seeing China, for example, finding inroads into several countries in Africa in particular the last couple of years. Japan is also finding footprints as well. Russia doesn't want to be left out of the action.
Exactly.
And then you find countries around Europe doing the same thing. For instance, what does this say about 54 countries of the continent of Africa? What does this say? About what attracts these countries to Africa? Is it for the love of it? Or there's some incentive somewhere that even Africa itself is not appreciating?
So to be honest, right, these foreign aid are not just charity. You know, most of them come with conditionalities.
Right.
Right. And because of that, I think Africa should not just see it as them just giving us charity, because these things comes with its own demand. You know, for instance, like the US now, they have a comprehensive foreign policy that everything they do kind of revolve around what would interest the American people. You know, so in as much as these things are happening, they are not entirely charity. So the conditionalities might be friendly, some might not be, some would kind of have positive effects to the economy, and then some of the aids will just kind of have like not so good impact on the economy.
Okay, let's talk about the big elephant in the room. United States Agency for International Development. They say from the American people. Now, there's been a question of, is it Donald Trump as an individual and the president of the free world that's pulling out, that's suspending USAID, or is it the American people that's doing that? Maybe that question is neither here nor there. But more specifically, let's talk about the implications and ramifications of this kind of action coming from the US and how this will have global impact.
So to answer your first question, I feel this is not just a Donald Trump's issue. I think this is an issue coming from the future, what we should expect from international politics or international development. You know, as I said earlier on, countries now are qualitative in their thinking. You know, so countries now are asking questions, okay, we are giving aid, what are we getting in return? So it's not business as usual. You know, so the American people, for instance, because most of this aid comes from taxpayers' money, they are not just donations from wherever it's coming from. These are taxpayers' money, and it means that questions are being asked. You know,
what value are we getting? They're asking questions like, what value are we getting for one of these? Yes.
You know, because I saw I think a message from the director of the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, yeah.
Yeah, he was saying that America is the only country, according to him, where taxpayers have been asked to pay money to donate to other countries. He hasn't seen that happening in anywhere in the world. You know?
And to him, that doesn't make sense.
To him, that doesn't really make sense, because what value are they getting? So it is more like qualitative questions being asked. What value are we getting? So I think it is high time that the African continent starts looking inward in their economy strategy blueprints. You know, we should not focus more on what we would get from the international community, because it's not going to be sustainable. We should have a resilient framework that, with or without the foreign aid, African economy is going to be stabilized. You know, and then another issue again, the global downturn.
Right.
You know, it's a big issue, because the world is still struggling to come back. You know, we had COVID recently. We had other issues that are kind of impacting, putting pressures on most of these countries. So they also have their own problems to contend with.
Interesting. You know, I want us to also look at the fact that you can't talk about foreign aid and not look at what they now call soft power.
Yes.
I mean, look at what British Council is doing in Nigeria. Look at several of these development agencies from different countries across the world. All of them have their foot on the ground in Africa.
Yes.
There's the argument that with this kind of action regarding United States Agency for International Development, it will further weaken the impact of US's soft power across the world.
So I think that perspective is debatable, because some of these countries are focused on value, you know. So it is a future of multilateralism. Gone were the days where most of these world powers would just want to, you know, be in line with African countries just for the sake of it. But now they are asking questions. Okay, we are giving you aid. What are we getting in return? You know, so it is not a question of okay, we're giving you aid in return of your submission or something. You know, now the question is value.
Is it even worth the investment?
Is it even worth the investment? So those are some of the questions that have been asked. You know, and I think in the 21st century, things have been done differently in the international scene. You know, different from, say, what we had like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when international partnership is being done based on principles, you know, but now it's being shaped based on political agenda.
Right.
Yes.
Interesting. Do you see this as a precursor for other countries to say, look, hold on a second, we wanted to do this the whole time, we didn't have the balls to pull it off, but now that Donald Trump has become the pathfinder, we'll follow in his footsteps. Do you see that happening?
I see that happening. You know, it is interesting that this is not the first time we are experiencing this. You know,
Wow.
I think 5 to 10 years ago there was a UK aid cut. Even in Nigeria, about 40% of their foreign aid were being slashed. Even some African countries like Uganda, Ethiopia. So these things are happening. So this is not just a US problem. This is not just a Donald Trump's problem. This is where the future of multilateralism is going to. You know, it's going to a place where if you don't have anything to offer,
Right.
countries will not really involve you in the core decisions making. So I see other donors replicating the same thing. You know, for instance, donors like maybe the EU and other big multilateral donors too as well.
You see, this is quite interesting because at the end of the day, this action will have impacts that are remarkably negative, or if you like, adverse on Africa. There are projects that are ongoing, courtesy of USAID. I mean, 100% courtesy of USAID. What are some impacts? What do you think will be some specific fallouts of this action going forward?
So I think the major impact will be around human capital development. It is unfortunately that the African continent as a whole kind of handed that component of development, the human capital development, to, you know, the international partners or the international community. You know, components of the human capital development involve, say, the health, for instance, education, you know, social welfare as a whole is going to be significantly affected. So let's take, for instance, the health component. USAID is actively funding the initiative called the PEPFAR. You know, apart from the PEPFAR, they have the family planning, maternal health. So those are initiatives that would...
And you have billions of dollars going into these initiatives.
Billions of and it's not just about the aid now. It's about the knowledge transfer. It's about the technical expertise, because they are not just giving money, you know, they are also giving, they are also sharing knowledge. They have structures scattered around the country, you know, because I think was it last or 2 weeks, the government of Nigeria trying to make some allocations to fit in the gap. But it's not just about allocation. It's about the structures now.
Is this sustainable?
Is this sustainable? You know, so it is a whole lot of issue. The human capital development of Africa, I think, is under risk because for a long time, you know, they have, I mean, the foreign aid, you know, organizations have actively been funding components of the human capital development. So I think it's going to have like a drastic negative impact.
All right, there's so much to talk about this impact and how the narrative is evolving, starting from this continent. Let's take a quick break, everyone. When we return, we'll look at who is speaking up for Africa at this point and what exactly are the rhetorics that they're advancing for the international community to listen to. All of that coming shortly. Do stay with us. Now, there's been the insinuation in some cases. They say, well, it has been established. The African leaders don't speak up. They are tied to the apron strings of the West, in particular. They are subservient. They play second fiddle. They are gullible and all whatnot. However, in recent years, we've seen some African leaders really stand up to speak to some of these very crucial issues. We've seen, for example, William Ruto of Kenya, who has found the, well, some people say it's courage to confront someone like Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, on some of the issues bedeviling Africa and how not just France, but Europe is exploiting these realities. We're seeing people like Paul Kagame of Rwanda also, you know, do the same. We've seen the president of Uganda, who has been very radical in his own way and all of that. Do you think this is a wake-up call for other African countries?
Yeah, I agree. It is a wake-up call for other African countries. But I think other than just talking, it is time to act. It is time to focus on our domestic issues.
Right.
We have challenges around socio-economic, political, security and other issues. I think it is high time that the leaders settle down. You
think the leaders have not settled down?
I think they have, but we need more of kind of intentional leadership from those African leaders. They should focus more on the components of human capital development, and not just economic growth. So other than just talking to world leaders, the reason why world leaders will behave the way they are behaving to African leaders is because of how we've relied on them for so many things. Imagine, say, our economy is doing well, we have political stability, security is not a big issue, even food security is not a big issue.
Right.
At least we kind of have some components to offer to the table, so that when world leaders are talking, we are not just lamenting, but we are talking value. We are having qualitative partnerships and not just venting maybe let's say frustration or something, or maybe raising our expectations too high. So I think it's time to act. Less talk and more action in line with human capital development.
Every time I talk to people like you, especially for those who have one leg in politics and maybe one leg in development work, they always talk about how that there are fundamental issues in Africa that must be first addressed before we even raise the notch of bar higher. They say, look, your electoral process is messed up across many countries on this continent, so you've got to fix it. Because there has to be credibility in the way leaders emerge. There has to be legitimacy. You don't want to have countries on this continent where a leader emerges, someone emerges as president, and people still have questions as to, was the process fair? Was it free? Was it credible? Was it transparent? Once you have that question mark around legitimacy, is already a problem across the world. And the rest of the world will see it from that standpoint. They say there's that problem we have to fix. Elections and the processes that produce leaders. And just say what we have seen in Ghana recently is a case in point as to how elections should be conducted at minimum level. And they also say that you come to Africa, you're hearing that we have so and so deposit of lithium in so and so country. We have so and so class of minerals in so and so country. I mean, go to our backyard here in northern part of our country, go to Zamfara, go to Katsina. I mean, just look at the northwest belt, for example, the amount of minerals deposited there. And you have such across this country. Let's not even go to crude for a second. What exactly is Africa missing? Why do we still have foreigners trooping into this continent to exploit all of these? And it appears what we do the whole time is just with our arms and watch it happen. Look at DR Congo, for example. Maybe we should start from that point.
So I think it is quite unfortunate that even in the midst of plenty, we are still having some of the issues we are having. The economists will call it a resource cost. You have so much, but you're complaining of scarcity. So you wonder what exactly is the problem. So I feel, or I think from the recommendation point of view, it is high time to start thinking diversification and utilization of unharnessed sectors or resources. Africa is blessed. Nigeria is blessed, both natural and human capital, resources. But when it comes to utilizing it, that's the problem. So I think it is high time that more work needs to be done around harnessing some of these resources that are not adequately harnessed. Nigeria is doing so well. Nigeria has a case study to the African continent, is doing so well around optimization. But I think optimization is not enough. We need to kind of diversify. There are sectors that are not adequately harnessed. So if those sectors are not well harnessed, it's not going to translate into sustainable development.
People keep talking about sectors. I mean, you're talking about sectors that are not adequately harnessed. People keep talking about agriculture. They talk about health, because they say we're not doing a lot with health. They talk about tech. Are we ready for that conversation? Because the world is now talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. They say that's the future for education, not the traditional conventional system we have known the whole time. Are we ready for that direction?
Yeah, I think it is not really about us now, because whether we like it or not,
The world will pull us along.
The world will pull us around. And as I would say, it's time to think global and act local. So it is time that we start having some of those conversations, harnessing the sectors that kind of have great potentials, but
Right.
because they are not adequately harnessed, we're not getting like the benefits from those sectors. Yeah, so we have all it takes. We have the human capital. Africa is a talented continent, So when it comes to the technical know-how, that's not a problem, because the world now is moving a little bit away from mineral resources to human resources, largely around services.
Right.
Yes.
Just a while ago, we talked about USAID, and we said some of the areas they focus on are education and health. And we look at our health sector. Up until this point, we're still debating what exactly is the allocation for education. I mean, look at the budget since, the last 20 plus years. What has been the highest? At the point, former Minister of Education, Malam Adamu, said that we had never done up to 10% in terms of allocation, even though UNESCO strongly recommends 26%. But of course, some people have also argued to say, well, Nigeria does not belong to UNESCO, so UNESCO cannot tell us what to allocate to education. That argument is probably for another day. But what we're saying is, to borrow your word, how do we optimize in terms of education in such a way that we understand that education should be something practical and add value, not just people brandishing several certificates, papers, and all of that. That's for education. As for health, this morning before you took your seat here, my colleague and I were talking about the University College Hospital in Ibadan. That's a frontline health facility, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. But how embarrassing it sounds when you read on the papers, sometimes headline stories of how that for days this same facility has not had power. For example, it's something that it just tugs at your hearts, all right? That's number one. Number two is we now have a situation where the Japa syndrome has become a phenomenon in itself. This morning, some paper is reporting that in Nigeria, the ratio is such that you have a case where it's one doctor to 1,800 cancer patients. Yesterday, there was a story of, somebody saying that you're better off working as a cleaner in the US or Europe than being a doctor in Nigeria. Now, these indices apparently don't look good. What can we start doing from the ground up to re-engineer these sectors? I
think, first off, it is quite unfortunate that we are having the kind of numbers that we are having. But I think the first thing to even do is to prioritize human capital development. It's not just about allocating. I remember in 2001, 2002, there was this Abuja declaration of education to allocate about 15% of the country's budget into education, which hasn't been fully operationalized. So I think the first thing to begin with is to prioritize the human capital development. What is even the human capital development? What are the components? Health, education, social welfare. These are components that would affect the most vulnerable. These are components that would affect everyone, not just the most vulnerable. So aside the allocation, there should be, intentionality when it comes to even monitoring and evaluation. These monies that are allocated, are they being adequately used? Is there a framework to check that what has been planned is what is currently happening? Another thing to consider is to even scale up the revenue generation, because you can't give what you don't have. You can't allocate what you don't have. So it is high time that leaders start thinking about how to generate more revenue. Another way to generate more revenue is by cutting down express expenditures. So it's not all about, okay, we want more revenue now. The revenue that we have, what are we doing with it? Already. Yeah. So it is high time we start thinking about, okay, prioritizing these sectors. There are sectors that we can maybe do them, after the human capital development components. They are important, but when you place them, alongside the human capital development human capital development, you would understand that sectors like the health, education are sectors that should be prioritized because they affect everyone, directly or indirectly.
You see, that's the interesting part, really. You can't talk about human capital development and not talk about the HDI, Human Development Index, for example. So it was 2015 at the twilight of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. So I spoke with a few medical consultants, all of them, of course, doctors, at a teaching hospital somewhere in the south, right? And one of them told me that data is at the very core of our development as a continent, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And he said, but there's a gap that most times we have a problem with data back at home. So domestic data, as he called it over a decade ago, is a challenge. And he gave an example. He says, so if you have, let's say, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Ford Foundation or MacArthur Foundation coming to Africa to say we want to invest in health, let's start with $100 million. If it happens that in that community or in those communities where they are interested in, the prevalent issue there is malaria, they will tell you want to work on polio instead of malaria, even though the locals say malaria is a real problem here. Because, as they say, he who pays the piper dictates the music. That's number one. The second factor is they come with their own data because they can't trust our data. So my question to you is, how do we actually work in such a way as a nation? Of course, we have the National Bureau of Statistics. It's laughable how that even the government of Nigeria sometimes will make mockery of statistics coming from the NBS because those statistics don't favor the government's stance on certain issues that are of national interest. So how do we create, for want of better words, what I like to call data credibility?
Data credibility is a major issue. And it's because of how complex the African continent, or using Nigeria as a case study, is. When it comes to data collection, it's a major problem. But yeah, I think around the world there are issues like that. But for Nigeria, for instance, to adequately align with, say, most of these multilateral organizations that are coming into the country to help out in the human capital development initiative, is to align with their interests, kind of, and then to give clear justifications on why these data, because not all the data are not credible, by the way. There are data that are actually credible. The National Bureau of Statistics is really doing a lot when it comes to primary collection of data. So it is high time that we explain this data to them, because most of them, they don't even understand the data. And because they don't understand the data, they work with what they have, because at least they understand where their data is coming from. Yeah. So I think one way to kind of address this is by being more clear, that clarity when it comes to communicating our issues. Why are these issues important to us? Why is malaria important and not polio? So these justifications need to be established, so that they would understand that, yes, we know you have your own interests, you have your own priority areas of interest, but we think these are what the people need. So it should be people focused and not really what whoever is coming into.
I can imagine. So let's begin to wrap up now. There have been issues of partnerships, international partnerships. Sometimes you hear the term international strategic partnerships. There are people who have said time and again vehemently that Africa and indeed Nigeria would have to rethink the way it partners with the rest of the world, because they say there's a lot of exploitation going on. That's Nigeria, and of course the entire continent always gets exploited by international partners because of course, the huge deposit of minerals that you have on this continent. What must African leaders do, whether those who are politically appointed, those who are elected or those who are appointed, to help rejig the way we think, the philosophy of leadership and development in such a way that we can also bring our chest, so to say, to the table instead of being at a disadvantage the entire time?
I think in a nutshell, let's have a strategic foreign policy.
Foreign policy, strategic one.
Yeah, a strategic foreign policy that speaks to us, that we can relate to. For instance, the foreign policy in the US is America first.
And they're very clear about it.
And they are very clear about it. Anything we are doing, when it comes to priority, America would come first before whoever is coming to the table. So foreign policy is very, very important.
All All right, I think that's where we're going to leave it, everyone. I'd like to say a big thank you to you for coming to the program to actually share with us this morning some of your very valuable thoughts on this issue. I'm very sure the USAID developments, this action has been taken by the U.S. government under the leadership of President Trump is going to continue to be talking points across not just Nigeria, but Africa, because it's a disruption, and for many countries, it's a shock that they are not likely going to recover from in a matter of days. I've been speaking with an international development economist, KWAJI NGIDA, who has been sharing context, insights, and perspectives on these developments. Again, we appreciate you for your time.
Thank you very much.
This is where we'll take a quick break, everyone. When we return, we'll domesticate our conversation and turn to tanker explosions. What exactly are the immediate and remote causes, and what specifically can we do by way of finding practical and long-term solutions to this menace? All of that coming up with Queen Agaba and our guest who has a handle on this development. Global Morning is your top morning show here on Global Television.
We bring you fresh news updates daily while delving into a variety of current affairs and topics.
A Global Morning aims to deliver newspaper reviews, latest news with experts on key global issues,
and at the same time keeping you well informed about important events, both national and internationals.
Global Morning serves as a valuable source of information, helping viewers like you start your day well informed.
Stay connected from Mondays to Sundays to a wide range of the latest news making rounds on Global Morning.
We're on the road to protest.
The president meets all of our demands.
This is Global Morning.